Nightmares manifest. Zeke kept his weapon drawn and eyes alert as they crept into the massive room. There was no way anything like Hographer would be sneaking up on them, especially since he was sure the monster wouldn't let them escape a second time. Nightingale practically sprinted across the huge space, eyes locked on the pedestal. Not even during the mass had she been so laser-focused. There was no sign of Hographer save for a dark stain on the floor. No body either, for which Zeke was grateful. Thief or not, that man hadn't deserved to be eviscerated by a giant head. Zeke stopped a few steps away from the pedestal, watching the doorways. "Get whatever was on the pedestal and we'll run," he called just loud enough that he was sure she could hear him. "We can figure out what it is once we're gone." I don't understand," Nightingale muttered, her voice agonized and angry. On the pedestal in front of her, there was an empty space where something of value once was. "It was just here. We came all this way and—" Suddenly, Nightingale threw her head back and her whole body began to shake. Her scream came so loud and painful that Zeke retreated a step in horror. Something black and oozing emerged from Nightingale's wailing mouth, gathering in the air in front of her. Zeke repressed a gag of revulsion as the strange mass grew larger and larger. Nightingale's scream shifted out of the human range, joined by 100 discordant voices from the monster's many mouths. Nightingale stumbled backward, collapsing onto the stone mere inches from the ledge. She lay there gasping like a fish, clawing weakly at her throat. Zeke dropped his weapon and stared in horror at the abomination before him. It looked like nothing he had seen before. It was even as bad as Hographer had been. At least that monster was made of flesh and conformed to geometry he could understand. This creature was neither, its hideous form curving in ways that hurt his eyes just to look at. Mouths and eyes and glittering stars all overlapped on its tar-like body. Even as he watched, the outline shifted, eyes melting away to organs he had no names for. It was all he could do not to retch at the sight. Yet it also spoke. It was not like a man, or even like the spirit Suri, with familiar words and strange intonations. Rather, it was as though the monster's voice made the world shake around it. It spoke with 1,000 discordant sounds, grinding stone and shattering glass in the last breath of a dying thief.
"Less than worthless,"
the abomination called.
"Are those from your realm so frail that not even this simple task was within your grasp? Such a feeble vessel is scarcely worth the air you waste by breathing."
"What are you?" Zeke was frozen with shock, his mind struggling and failing to process the monster in front of him. It turned its rage on him.
"Slugs contained by numbered dimensions, pretended gods of accidental agelessness. I have seen divinity. I obey no false lords. I am Malama."
Rook charged suddenly past Zeke, bearing down on the monster, weapon raised in both hands.
"Get away from her!"
The thing raged in response, screeching and boiling around Rook like a cloud of hostile smoke. Before Rook could attack the Malama, it grabbed Nightingale around the head and flowed down over her. Zeke rushed over to help, with Remy not far behind, but they were too slow. By the time they made it to Nightingale's side, the monster had already forced itself back down her throat. One last flash of shimmering tar and it was gone. Remy shoved her way past them, lifting Nightingale gently into a sitting position. "She's still breathing." They stared and nobody spoke. Zeke wasn't sure how long they sat there in silence. Eventually, Nightingale started to twitch, opening one eye. Remy let her go, and she didn't fall over. Nightingale's voice was painfully weak. Did you guys see that?" "Yeah." Zeke's voice was low and worried. "We saw." Nightingale practically jumped to her feet, staring down at herself in horror. "Where did it go?" She patted at her own body as if it was a foreign entity. We'll just get Balthazar. He knows about all kinds of monsters." She stumbled away towards the door, panicking now. "Let's go." "Night." He sounded hesitant, but he put an arm up to slow her retreat. "He already left on the memorial hunt, remember? He's gone." "Right." She stopped, her tail whipping about behind her so fast it looked like it hurt. "What about Kezia? Or even Yoel? I know you don't like him, but he is your brother," Rook asked. "My mom's probably gone by now, and Yoel's an asshole. I'm not even sure he'd know how to help me. He might even just lock me up in a dungeon or something." She swayed a little on her feet. Zeke caught her before she could fall, careful not to step into the path of her tail. Rook frowned. "Okay then, what about Shayless?" Nightingale didn't slow down. her eyes darting about as she spoke. Oh yeah, if she knows enough to be a teacher at the Institute, she's gotta know about whatever the hell just happened to me. That sounds sensible. Rook's voice was quiet but urgent. We should get her as quick as we can. After making all that noise, who knows what might come this way? Suri bobbed nearby, looking concerned. I sense that creature is something from my world. Something that shouldn't be in this realm. Nightingale was still for a moment longer, catching her breath. She jerked away from Zeke, heading for the open doorway. Let's just see what we can do to get rid of it as soon as possible. With Suri's help, they made good time back to the surface without encountering anything that might slow their way. Nightingale seemed to be recovering as they went. By the time they made it back to the surface, she'd stopped swaying, and the color had mostly come back to her skin. Nightingale found her sister alone in one of the upper halls of the castle. Her friends waited downstairs at her request. If she was going to get the information she needed without exposing what she'd done, it would take subtlety that she couldn't manage with everyone else present. Shayless perched atop a banister, tossing a ball against the nearby wall. Her aim was almost perfect and she caught it each time. Good thing, too, considering the fall waiting for her if she leaned too far back. In the center of the massive spiral staircase was a 3-story drop. Hey, sis! Shayless waved, leaning out a little to catch the ball before it could fly over the edge. Hey! Nightingale waved back awkwardly, leaning against the stone beside her sister. What's up? Shayless looked up. Hiding from the new master and commander, Your Highness Yol? Shayless rolled her eyes, then smiled. So, I heard you had some fun in the city. Nightingale looked away, afraid that Shayless would see the lie in her expression. Yeah, we've been having a great time. Just enjoying our new freedom from the Institute, she said it with a forced smile. Shayless went back to bouncing the ball. Just make sure you're being careful. Madara is a dangerous place. Yeah, Nightingale turned, on the pretext of casually looking down at the drop below. So, some people in the city were talking about some kind of monster. Have you ever heard of a Malama? Shayless stayed focused on the ball. Her tone unchanged. Malama? Never heard of it. She hopped down, landing on the stairs just behind Nightingale. You sure it wasn't just a rumor? We get a lot of those here. Nightingale tried to hide her disappointment. If Shayless didn't know about the Malama, Yol sure as hell wouldn't. That only left one option, one that Nightingale didn't want to have to resort to. Yeah, probably. Nightingale started walking away. Thanks anyway, sis. You're the best. Shayless watched her as she hurriedly scurried away. Nightingale hoped that she wasn't too suspicious. Nightingale found her friends waiting for her in the great hall, gathered nervously at the end of a massive table. The room was deserted and there was no trace of Yol or any of the city's other nobility. Rook rose as she approached, hands folded. What did Princess Shayless have to say? Not much, unfortunately. She walked to the edge of the table but didn't actually sit. She was far too nervous to settle down. She'd never heard of a Malama. Did you find out about anything from Suri? Rook shook his head. We tried, but she couldn't stay long. She can only stay in this realm for short periods of time before she's forced to leave. Nightingale sighed, then spoke up. I think I might know somewhere else we could try, but you're not going to like it. Remy and Zeke got to their feet, though it was Rook who spoke first. Hopefully it doesn't involve any more dungeon delving. Nightingale lowered her voice to a whisper, forcing them all to lean in close to listen. It doesn't involve any dungeon delving, but it's probably still dangerous since it's my father's study. That drew the reaction she'd been expecting, stares and concern. Rather than let them form their own objections, Nightingale rushed on. If my father were still here, he'd let us in, she reasoned. He'd probably know what this was without even having to look it up. She met Rook's eyes, who looked like he was going to be the first to object. I know you saw it, Nightingale spoke before he could. Whatever a Malama is, it isn't good. Balthazar's study is my only chance of finding the way to get this damn thing out before it gets worse. There was a brief silence as they considered. Again, it was Rook who spoke first. I heard the king has some incredibly ancient texts in his protection. He sounded hesitant, but also a little excited. I suppose studying them would be a rare privilege. Remy reached into her bag, drawing out a little pouch. She rolled it out on the table in front of them, revealing an intricate-looking set of lock-picking tools. I could probably get us in. 10 minutes later, and she did. The study itself was a 2-story affair with packed shelves filling every spare inch. The lower floor was mostly desk space, while the upper had a wide stone balcony and shelves on both sides. Zeke stopped briefly to take in the massive spectacle of Balthazar's study. The group began searching in relative silence, all conscious of the clandestine nature of their search. Nightingale would take personal responsibility if they got caught, but even so, she doubted Yul would be lenient. Rook was by far the fastest of their group, scanning whole shelves in seconds and selecting a title or two to add to the growing stack in his arms. Within an hour, he'd figured out Balthazar's filing system, and by nightfall, he'd found the only relevant book in the entire library. Rook cleared his throat, startling Nightingale out of her stupor. She dozed in a teetering mountain of books. She caught the largest stack just as it started to sway, preventing a catastrophic landslide. "What is it?" "I think I found what we need." Rook spoke slowly, hefting the tome in both hands. It was an enormous book, nearly 3 whole feet wide. The pages were frayed at the edge, yellow with age.
"I wish there was more, though."
Zeke hurried down from the upper balcony. Remy looked up from her reading, face buried in the smattering of papers on Balthazar's desk. Nightingale thought that a little strange that she'd be looking through her father's personal papers for clues, but dismissed her concern in the face of finally getting an answer. Rook flipped the book open to a page she'd been holding with his finger, scanning until he found the section he wanted.
"The Malama parasite cannot be removed except through the destruction of the host, at which point the creature will be forced to take for itself the nearest living creature as its new host, or else be banished from the material world, forced to return to its native realm of Arkala."
Rook looked up.
"There's a long list of people here that were infected or suspected to be infected, and how they died."
Nightingale barely suppressed a whimper. She felt strangely numb, staring down at her hands. "I'm dead then. My first real adventure, and I get a demon in my head that's going to kill me." She shivered, her voice stretching into strained laughter. "I guess Balthazar was right about me being too soft for the demiurge." It seemed strange to think life had been so optimistic only a few days earlier. Nightingale had an ageless life ahead of her, a future in a prestigious military organization, and friends she trusted. Now all of that was crumbling. Her future would come to a twisted and painful end as a parasite strangled her from the inside. She would be like that mad thief before the end, and there was nothing she could do.
"Nightingale!"
Zeke's shout cut through the fog in her head, and she jerked suddenly toward him. "What?" Tears were brimming in her eyes, threatening to run down her face, and she had a hard lump in her throat as she tried to compose herself. She brushed at her eyes with the back of one arm. "What is it?"
Rook cleared his throat. "I didn't finish. There's this part here at the end I think you should hear."
He held the book up and spoke more loudly.
"It is widely known that practitioners of the ancient Theodosian magic employed Malama as familiars. How they could have prevented the creatures from infecting them is not known, yet the reality of this claim cannot be denied."
He trailed off, closing the book.
"See?"
Zeke rested one hand gently on Nightingale's shoulder.
"It's not hopeless. Whoever these Theodosian guys were, they knew how to control them. All we have to do is dig up the technique and—"
He looked away.
"Rook, I bet you already found the book on them, right? We probably don't even have to leave the study."
Rook sighed, collapsing into a nearby chair. It creaked and strained under his weight.
"When I found this book, I did search. Unfortunately, there's nothing here. Nothing I could find anytime soon, anyway."
He gestured over his shoulder at the thousands and thousands of books.
"It could take years, assuming there's anything to find. I've heard about Theodosian before, though. It's supposed to be powerful stuff, but until today I haven't read anything reputable that even verified it actually existed. Finding it will take more than breaking into a study."
Remy plopped down beside Nightingale. "I might know where we could learn more." Remy had a sheaf of papers in one hand. "My father," she sighed, "he's not the best person on Madara, but he's in the business of getting information. If anyone could find where we could learn about a long-dead school of magic, it's probably him." "Where does he live?" Nightingale swallowed hard and tried to regain her composure. This bit of hope, albeit however small, stopped her surmounting fear and sadness and was enough to banish the numbness she had started to feel. They'd already conquered a few impossible odds over the last day or two. What were a few more? Remy started flipping through the stack of papers, licking her fingers at each page turn. "He's in Romstead. It's a few days' walk from here. Faster if you can fly." Rook set his own large book down, then rose as well.
"I think it's best we get going.
The longer we're here in the study, the more likely Shayless or Yol will catch us. Nightingale looked around as though expecting to see a troop of guards emerging from the upper balcony. You're right, she agreed.
Humans are all alike.
Nightingale froze as words filled her head.
So full of hope. You think that getting rid of me will be so easy?
She spun, searching the space around her for the speaker. She saw no one but her friends. The voice wasn't coming from the room. It was coming from inside her. Is everything all right? Remy's voice interrupted her search. Nightingale realized Remy was staring at her with a concerned look. Did you hear that? Nightingale asked. Remy cocked her head to the side and raised her eyebrows slowly. Hear what? Are you okay? Nightingale forced a smile. Yeah, I'm fine. We have a plan. Let's head to Romstead. Then in the back of her head, a voice only she could hear continued.
Theodosian is a lost magic girl. Try as you might, I'll have your body soon enough.
The voice sent a chill through her body, and Nightingale ignored the voice, blocking it out with all the willpower she could muster. Rook began cleaning up as to not alert Balthazar that someone without his knowledge had ever entered his study. Let's go grab our supplies, then. Get on the road before Yol or Shayless realize their sister is missing.